Tonight's session is drugs and the astral. And most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with what is called the astral plane. And that's not one that you catch at O'Hare Airport. That is one that you have to search for within. But at the beginning sessions, I remember people asked me again, do you teach astral projection? And I just simply looked at them because to come and ask me, do I teach astral projection, pretty much meant that they didn't need to learn astral projection, because it's just not a question you ask somebody, as you will find out when you're more into these sessions again. Drugs in the astral, of course, is something that deals with metaphysics from the look of what the astral is, and then also the use of drugs in general. What is very interesting about the whole concept of drug usage is that it's been said that close to 10 million people use drugs in the United States. 10 million people. I think really that might be an underestimation. If the figure of some 260 million is what represents the total population of the United States, I would really guess to say that probably close to, 50 to 60 million. But the figure is 10 million. We are a drug society. There was a program done almost 15 years ago that was really never aired, and it was about the drug usage and government involvement in the drug usage. It also stated that since drugs is the largest unlisted industry in the world, and prostitution is said to be the second largest unlisted industry, that the two seem to go hand in hand. When stress is put upon a person in any society, the way around the stress seems to either be suicide or to try and get away from the stressful situation. In many cases, the stressful situation is contingent upon how much income and money the person can begin to make or must maintain, and as such, they really can't get away from it, so what they do is to escape mentally. And the interesting thing about the use of drugs is that once you start to do that, then there's really no way out. The United States is actually a country of drug and dope users. And it's very easy to understand that when you begin to do that. And we're going to spend a little time tonight doing that. Let me start off by saying that in the use of drugs, alcohol is the chief user. It is the chief culprit. And most people don't realize that alcohol is a drug. Alcohol, even to the content of that is found in beer, is a drug. We have all kinds of drugs, therefore, that we use daily. There is the early morning wake-up shot. There is the lunch break shot. And in many cases, people have 2 and 3 shots at lunch. Not to mention beer and wine, which is almost considered as soda pop. Also very interesting, too, we have sometimes the company water cooler break, in which coffee is sometimes spiked in the wintertime, and the reason for that is said because it's so cold outside and still trying to take the chill off of my bones. We then have, of course, the going home in the evening shot before the commuter catches the railroad train or before the person gets in his car or just simply jumps on the L. And especially if there is a group of people riding in one car, then one person might bring the bottle and they're sharing it in the car. Then, of course, there is the just before dinner cocktail. And, of course, there is the before dinner or during dinner wine, and then the after dinner wine. And then after that, there is the hot toddy at night, and then the hot toddy to sleep on so that you can go to sleep easier. The whole idea is that alcohol, even during the week, is an accepted concept. On the weekend, of course, people can actually go on binges because it's okay. In addition to the sneaky type of drugs and the use of alcohol, there are the drugs that are even more sneaky, the ones that are put into pharmaceutical prescriptions. and the ones that are generally put into sometimes of things as preservatives. And they're not vegetable alcohol, but grain and wood alcohol. There's also, in addition to that, all of the prescription drugs that a person must take in order to maintain sanity and be free from pain. And there are many people that have all kinds of drugs that they take for rheumatism and for arthritis or headaches. There are drugs to go to sleep with and drugs to wake up by. There are drugs to keep you alert. There are drugs to maintain what we would call equilibrium. They're just drugs upon drugs upon drugs. In fact, if you go to a drugstore and at the pharmaceutical section, you will always see long lines of people waiting to get their pharmaceutical prescriptions filled. In addition, in a drugstore, and that's exactly what they call themselves, you will find whole shelves worth of drugs for almost everything you can think of. And metaphysics has one statement to make about drugs. It says simply this: there is not a drug in the world that can do anything to permanently repair or regenerate anything in the human body. I'll repeat that once more. There is not a drug in the world that can do anything to permanently repair or regenerate anything in the human body. All the drugs can do is to palliate, satiate, and promulgate further drug usage. Because once you begin to use a drug, the necessity is that you must go to another drug to augment that drug or to take away the side effects of that drug. And once you're on it, to begin to get off of it is a tumultuous task. It becomes very difficult to get off of drug usage again. When we look at the history of drugs, we think in terms of dope. And when we think in terms of dope, we seem to think in terms of India. We seem to think in terms of parts of the Mideast and hashish. We think of everything but, of course, the United States. We find that drugs supposedly originated in many of the provinces of South America and in China and every place in, in the Far East, per se. There is a $200 billion, and I watch my words very carefully here, a $200 billion world dope revenue. Over our planet, $200 billion per year is made off of the use of dope. And when we begin to think of dope, we also learn from our history lessons in school about what is called the Opium Wars. How many of you studied the Opium Wars in school when you were there? Opium Wars. Generally, we're told, of course, that the Opium Wars were something that happened in the area of China around Nanking, and that they were simply a war between the British and the Chinese to stop the use of dope. What is not generally told is just how serious that Opium War was, how many people it affected, and who actually started it. It was June in 1840 when a British fleet arrived in what was called Canton Harbor, China. They laid siege to that particular area and threatened to wipe Canton, China, off the map. The Chinese emperor at that time, a man by the name of Lin Se-Hu, tried to lead a series of crackdowns against the opium that was being brought into China through the British in the form of the British trading companies. Now, this particular group was called the Triad Group. Interestingly enough, if you want to note that name, the Triad Group. And they were actually bringing dope into China. And it was the Chinese who didn't want the dope or the opium fed to their people, especially to their young people again. The Jesuits, in turn, or at least it was started by one Jesuit, and the Church of England more or less brought missionaries. So you say the Jesuit came as a representative of the Catholic faction, and then the missionaries also came, and they recruited into the East Indian companies what we would call people to use dope. What they actually did was to say, okay, let's let this trading company be here. And as a peaceful people, you should accept these people being here because they're simply going to trade with your government and bring money into your land. But what happened was through these trading companies, the chief item of trade happened to be drugs. And this case was dope. When Emperor Lin Se-Hu attempted to arrest one of the British nationals there, who was dealing dope directly through what is called an opium house, and he got enough evidence to prove that the British, in this particular British trading company, was dealing through an opium house again. He stated again that the commissioner that was there on site representing the British government should be told about that. He was told about that, and the commissioner at that time, his name was Captain Charles Elliot. He aimed to protect the drug smugglers instead of trying to get rid of the drug trafficking. And of course, when the Emperor Hugh, said, I'm going to arrest all of you, and we're going to put you on trial, they wired Britain, and Britain sent the fleet. And it's very interesting, again, that is why the fleet sailed into Canton Harbor and laid siege to the, again, province of Canton. And the idea was that they should accept this dope trade and accept the Triad Company, or they would simply blow up Canton from Canton Bay. The interesting name of the opium house that was dealing this was the Jardine Matheson Company, referred to as J&M Enterprises, Jardine Matheson Company. The British Navy caused the emperor to make concessions, and he had to sign a treaty that was called the Treaty of Nanking, or the Nanking Treaty. Signed that in 1842. And this particular treaty brought the British Empire the sum of $21 million, not in money, but in silver. $21 million worth of silver. I shouldn't say dollars. We use a dollar, but they use silver at that time. They had to give this to the British government to allow the British government to sell their young people dope. They also agreed to what was called extraterritorial control. Extraterritorial control. That gave the British free reign over the free port, as they call it, of Hong Kong, and which, of course, to this day is the area where most of the shipping now comes in. So this particular treaty worked definitely against the Chinese government because they had to give money to a besieging nation to bring in dope and to allow trade through a company which was found to be, again, negative as far as their people's health was concerned. And then they had to give the use of Hong Kong Harbor to the British. 12 years later, it really was almost about 11 and a half years, wasn't even quite 12 years again, Britain again struck. And this time they started what was called the Second Opium War. This particular time, the British merchant banks and trading companies established again what is called the Hong Kong and Shanghai Corporation. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Corporation, which still exists today. And it's been stated by many of the international legal bodies that these companies, although they still are in business and they can't seem to prove too much of this, they still make the claim that they are the ones which traffic in the black market of drugs. Interesting about all of this is that we, in turn, think of what is called the opium and dope traffic coming from India and from the Asiatic area as being started by the Asiatics, and in this case we see it was not, and it was promulgated now by the Westerners in the form of the British and the British Empire. There was a movie out not too long ago called The Sand Pebbles. How many of you saw The Sand Pebbles? Anyone in here see it? I think it started just one person. Okay. Well, that particular one gave a slant on the dope traffickers and the Red Brigade, the Red Guard, from a non-nationalistic and more or less British point of view. But if you understand that the Red Guard and the revolution that went on there when they purged and killed so many of their own people, these were the ones that were conspiring again with what they called the Western mentality that was bringing